Hi, writers. Lisa Jones here. Any of you who have had any interaction with me or my writing classes probably know I like to maunder on and on and on about the great emotional payoff available to writers who write through their senses, the senses of smell, taste, touch, sight, and hearing. On this tape, I'm going to dispense some writing tips, probably for the last 90 seconds of the tape. What you can do to prepare writers is get a piece of writing you've already written, one that might lack color, texture, that might not have the emotional traction you want it to have. But honestly, to get the full benefit, you really need to hear what's coming before that. It's the tale of kind of a miracle. Bonnie-Sue Hitchcock, the wonderful writer from Alaska, was once a student of mine, and it was in my class that this award-winning novel was conceived. We will tell the story of that. So stay tuned for Writing Through Your Senses and the wonderful Bonnie-Sue Hitchcock. One day, Bonnie-Sue, who was my student years ago,
She your first student.
One of my first students, in fact. And she and her other fellow students walked through the door, and I said, "Hey, how come when we were little kids, our friends' houses smelled weird, but our house mysteriously didn't?" Or so we thought. Write about that. So they did. And Bonnie-Sue Hitchcock, here with us all the way from the boreal forests of the Great North, she wrote something that went on to win an award in a literary journal and went on to get a book contract and win award after award.
This
And
happens to everyone who takes Lisa's class.
yes, it happens to everyone.
Every single one.
Actually, it doesn't, but people do make great strides.
But this is pretty much what I wrote that day by hand. Do you remember, Lisa?
I think you wrote it by hand. You wrote by
Okay.
hand a lot.
Yeah, and it was just called The Smell of Other People's Houses, which was the title of the prompt. In ninth grade, my boyfriend was Jason Johansson. His father was a dentist and a hunting guide in the bush. They built a new house on Campbell Lake where they could park their float plane and we could snow machine all the way down Campbell Creek in the winter. The whole house was made of fresh cut cedar. All of Jason's clothes smelled like cedar, and it made me sneeze when I got close to him, but I got close anyway. To this day, when I smell cedar, I think of swim team parties at their house and the big 8x10 Ronald Reagan photograph that hung in the living room. Cedar is the smell of Republicans. It's the smell of sneaking from Allison's room, that of his older sister, whom I befriended out of necessity, and into Jason's room, where I crawled into his queen-size bed that faced the sliding glass doors that looked out onto the lake. How many ninth graders have a queen-size bed? I'm guessing one, and it had sheets that smelled like cedar and Tide, and they held a boy with curly blonde hair that reeked of chlorine. He was the best diver in the state, and I was only on a stupid JV relay team, but we could have drowned in our combined smells of chlorine and naivete. He knew how to French kiss, which tasted like a forest of promises once I got used to it. He said the lights on the lake were our lights, and because I was Catholic and smelled stiff instead of wild, he promised not to do anything but touch me lightly and only in certain places where the smell wouldn't give me away. When I went back to my own house that held nothing but the acrid stink of cigarette smoke and secondhand furniture, also known as guilt and sin. At the Johanssons, everything was fresh like it had just been flown in on a bush plane, and you could do anything. Their shag carpet was so thick, in the morning I followed my own deep orange footprints back to Allison's bed and pretended I'd been there all night. "You smell like my brother," she'd say as we curled up together. "You smell like your brother," I'd tell her. "Yeah, well, don't try anything," she'd say. The Johanssons were friends with John Denver, and when he came to stay with them, he slept in Allison's bed. She had to sleep on the pull-out couch. After he left, she told me she was never going to wash the sheets again. We lay on our faces and tried to breathe in John Denver, but I only smelled something foreign, something from outside, somewhere in the lower 48. "I smell the Wrangell Mountains," she said. Later, I would learn that he wrote that song at their house, and I doubt that she smelled them. The mountains are thick and ripe with snow and smell like glaciers and homesickness. Her sheets were stale, like old socks. I went and sat in Jason's closet so I could get John Denver out of my nose. Cedar. I sneezed. I stole a white t-shirt and took it home to sleep with it under my pillow. Jason would call me late at night on the kid's phone with the long red cord that stretched from the hall into my room, and I would put his shirt over my head and listen to his voice telling me about the lights on the lake and how he liked listening to Olivia Newton-John so much better than John Denver, but not to tell anyone. We talked about swim practice, and I licked chlorine off my arm, pretending it was his. I asked him why his family liked Ronald Reagan so much, and he said he didn't know, but that Reagan wore cowboy boots, and that was enough for him. I have not read that, Lisa, since I wrote it in your class. I'm a little surprised by my own writing.
It's so good, isn't it? It's so good.
That literally came out of that day. I remember all of us reading those smelly prompts, and it was just this fabulous, that was a fabulous day. I don't know why. I don't know what happened. Sometimes it just clicks, you know?
Well, that's a thing. I find when I give my students constraints of some kind, like only write about your sense of smell, which is something we don't go around doing. You know, we don't kind of quote dumb it down out of our giant overformed, calculating brains into what does it smell like? And you did that like, I mean, it was like watching someone hit a home run like over the bleachers. It was so good. But that's what I find is if you constrain people in a certain weird way, it feels a little uncomfy, but then something amazing happens that wouldn't happen otherwise. Toothpaste doesn't just leave the tube because it wants to. It has to be squashed.
Wow. But the way that your classes are structured really help find like your own voice. I mean, that kind of sounds cliche, but.
Well, that makes me so happy to hear. But I think that over time, what happens is bonds are formed and people embolden each other. And that's what I really like.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you start to get more comfortable. I actually, you know how I would never write anything about anything sexual. I just didn't, I shy away from that.
You could write something.
Even reading that piece, I was like, oh, I remember who I was sitting next to. And I remember, kind of like dipping my toe a little bit. I mean, obviously you guys never think my writing is sexual, even when I thought it was very steamy, but.
I thought that was quite steamy, honestly.
That was steamy.
So writers, this is a very simple writing lesson. Write about how everything smells. I mean, why not? Right, Bonnie-Sue?
Maybe not everything, but yeah.
Not everything, but maybe yes, everything. In all seriousness, our sensory processing areas are right next to our emotional processing areas. So if you're writing fiction or memoir that is you want to have touch your readers' hearts, the way to do it is write it through your senses, your 5 senses, sight, taste, touch, hearing, and smell. Now, smell is our favorite, right, Bonnie-Sue?
It's my favorite, yeah.
It's our favorite. It's also the oldest and the most reptilian. So it's the easiest writing lesson in the world. Go through everything you've written, and every 4th sentence, try to insert a sense perception.
What a great tip.
God, I just thought of that. Anyway, thanks for joining today. Thank you, Bonnie-Sue.
Thanks,
Keep
Lisa.
writing.